And I want you to listen to this for a minute. Based on generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP-based accounting, that is generally accepted accounting principles, the 2012, this is last year, the 2012 consolidated financial statements of the United States government showed a $6.9 trillion deficit for fiscal 2012, up from a $4.6 trillion deficit in 2011. The latest details show the uncontainable and uncontrollable actual federal budget deficit to be deteriorating rapidly. The information was released by the U.S. Treasury Department yesterday. So where do we come up with these numbers? Where does Mr. Williams come up with them? Those deficit numbers reflect consistent, generally accepted accounting principles on current fiscal operations plus year-to-year deterioration in the net present value of unfunded liabilities for programs such as Social Security and Medicare. So what he's saying is you've got to add together current fiscal operations, that is, the current spending for the current fiscal year, and the unfunded liabilities owed during the current fiscal year. Because somebody has to pay that someday, some way, and while it's unlikely we're going to actually, or our children or grandchildren are going to be able to pay it out of their pockets, we're going to pay it, or they're going to pay it, through a collapse in our fiscal system. He said this represents the amount of cash in hand needed to cover future obligations. So it's about $7 trillion in 2012. $7 trillion in deficit spending in 2012. He says based on tentative calculations from numbers in the report, this is the government report, total U.S. government obligations, including the net present value of the unfunded liabilities of social programs, is around $88 trillion, or nearly 6 times the annual United States gross domestic product. So when we're honest and use actual accounting principles like companies have to, like small businesses have to, like you do when you pay your federal income taxes, those who do, the yearly deficit is not 1 point some odd trillion, it's $7 trillion, up from $4.6 trillion in 2011. John Williams writes, even so, significant accounting problems with the statements continue, meaning the government statements, including material issues raised by the auditor, the Government Accountability Office, GAO. As a result, the GAO does not offer an opinion on the statements. But with fully proper accounting, the actual 2012 deficit likely topped $7 trillion, with the 2011 deficit likely topping $5 trillion. And so what are we talking about here? Obama raises taxes on the rich by $600 billion and calls this a balanced approach. He refuses to touch entitlements and try to reform them for the long haul. He refuses to cut any spending whatsoever in current fiscal operations. And the Republicans buckle because they're getting advice and cover and protection from so-called conservatives who are telling them you can't win this fight, so don't make the fight. You can't win it politically, so don't fight it. It's so unprincipled. And we're reaching a point where it's becoming, in my view, let me say it, unpatriotic. It's becoming, in my view, unpatriotic for the Republican Party to continue to play these games with the American people and their party members, and for so-called pseudo-conservatives on TV and elsewhere to play along. If we can't win the fight, then we can't win the fight, but you make the fight. And if we lose politically, then we lose politically. But you have to stand up for what's right sometimes. You can't always be positioning yourself and making calculations. And then, in part, it hasn't even helped the Republican Party. So the actual 2012 deficit is over $7 trillion. And the actual 2011 deficit is over $5 trillion. And you can explain that now because we're including not only current fiscal operations, which is all they talk about, but the unfunded liabilities. And as this gentleman puts it, it's a deteriorating situation. And he's exactly right. The net present value represents the amount of cash in hand needed to cover future obligations. $7 trillion. This year, $5 trillion last year. And so, of course, Obama's involved in this in a big way because he won't even allow any discussion about spending cuts. And the Republicans are going along because they're trying to position themselves. They're in a very troubling mindset right now, and they're being encouraged to show weakness, to surrender by Krauthammer, by a bunch of others whose names I can't remember. Oh, they can't win this. Let's fight another day. And a lot of these are people that don't even understand what they're talking about. They don't even understand the full picture of the debt, that we're spiraling out of control. Explain that to the American people, those who wish to listen. I pulled some other statistics together myself, saying how many continuing resolutions have there been? In fiscal year 2010, there were 2. In fiscal year 2011, there were 8. In fiscal year 2012, 5. We get these continuing resolutions because the Senate refuses to pass a budget, because the Senate is working with Obama to sabotage the Congressional Budget Act passed in 1974, which Congress passed to apply to itself, and which Congress ignores, and which the other day the president himself ignored. The president is supposed to be the first to present a budget which he believes represents the needs of the executive branch and so forth. The president said, we'll be late. And he's been late every year. He just doesn't give a damn. Now, we haven't had a federal budget since April 29, 2009. And so we go from one crisis to another, and they are all manufactured. These are man-made, manufactured political crises created by the President of the United States. No budget, no entitlement reform, no spending cuts, one deadline after another after another. The Republicans keep trying to figure out how to address this politically, so they keep dodging and coming up with arguments. I mean, look at this already. Obama just sits there, and what are the Republicans doing again? Negotiating with themselves. Hey, we have a 3-month idea. There they are. And what about the debt limit? How many times has that been increased in recent years? Well, I took a look. The debt limit has been raised 11 times since 2001. Bush and Obama. 11 times since 2001. And the biggest spenders in world history. Obama number 1. Hate to tell you. George W. Bush number 2. And these George W. Bush staffers are all over TV, all over the place telling us, let's fight the next fight. We can't win this one. Let's fight the next fight. We can't win this one. Where are the Reaganites on TV? I don't see them. I don't see them as hosts. I don't see them as guests. I don't see them as panel members. I don't see them. Do you? No. They're not invited. They're not wanted. And so this is what we're stuck with. Mush Republicanism and radical status Democrats.